I want to start today with a bit of a crisis, not a personal one, but an identity crisis for an entire field of science.
Oh, are we putting a scientific discipline on the therapy couch today?
In a way, yes. There's this fantastic scene in Malcolm Bradbury's novel, The History Man. A character is at a party, and someone asks him to define himself. They ask if he's a structuralist or a formalist or, and this is the kicker, a psycholinguist.
That sounds like an accusation.
It does.
Like a linguist who has completely lost the plot.
Exactly. And the character immediately recoils. He says, I'm none of them. I'm a 19th century liberal. It's a joke, but it highlights this massive tension we're unpacking today. What on earth is psycholinguistics?
Right.
Is it just grammar with a side of therapy? Is it psychology? Or is it something else entirely?
It's a fascinating tug of war. And honestly, that awkwardness in the name psycholinguistics, it points to a very real struggle that has been going on for centuries.
A battle to define what language actually is.
Yes. Is it a static object, like a mathematical formula or a piece of code that you study in a dusty book? Or is it a mental activity, something living and breathing that we do with our brains and our bodies?
That is the mission for this deep dive. We're looking at a comprehensive handbook chapter by Garnham, Garrod, and Sanford called Observations on the Past and Future of Psycholinguistics. We're going to trace this history from, well, the toga-wearing philosophers of ancient Greece all the way to modern neuroscience.
And crucially, we're going to look at where the field is going, because the source argues that we're on the verge of a major shift. It turns out the future of understanding language might not be in our dictionaries or even just in our brains.
But in our muscles.
They're muscles.
Spoilers. But okay, let's rewind way, way back. The source suggests we need to go back about 2,500 years to find the source code for this entire debate.
Right, to the heavy hitters, Plato and Aristotle.
It always comes back to them, doesn't it? It feels like every deep dive we do, they're lurking in the background.
They really are the original nature versus nurture debate team. On one side, you have Plato. He was the ultimate rationalist. He believed that concepts, the mental furniture of our minds, are innate. They're pre-installed software.
So we don't learn what a circle or justice is, we just kind of remember it.
In a sense, yes. He believed we made contact with a world of ideal forms. And what's fascinating is that this idea never really went away. The source mentions a modern philosopher, Jerry Fodor, who basically argued the same thing in the late 20th century. He argued for a language of thought that we're born with.
Plato the time traveler.
Yeah.
Okay, so Plato says ideas are built in. Then you have Aristotle in the other corner.
Aristotle wasn't buying it. He was the original empiricist. He believed knowledge comes from experience. You touch the fire, it burns, you learn hot, you hear your mother speak, you learn words.
The blank slate.
Exactly. And this set up a 2,000-year argument. But for a long time, the study of language specifically was stuck on the logic side. It was treated as this abstract thing you studied on paper.
So grammar, logic, rules.
All of that. It wasn't about the messy, wet psychology of how a human brain actually processes a sentence in real time.
Until the explosion happened. The Leipzig explosion, if you will.
Late 19th century, Germany. This is where things get real.
This was a surprise to me. I always learned that Wilhelm Wundt is the father of psychology. He opened the first psych lab in Leipzig in 1879. I pictured him just doing reaction time tests and staring at metronomes.
He did that. But here's the nugget that often gets left out of Psych 101 textbooks. Wundt was obsessed with language. He wrote these massive volumes on Sprach psychology, speech psychology.
Sprach psychology. That is fun to say.
It is. And his lab wasn't just for psychologists. It was a melting pot. You had the fathers of modern linguistics people like Ferdinand de Saussure and Leonard Bloomfield actually sitting in Wundt's lectures.
So this was the golden age. Psychologists and linguists actually talking to each other.
Briefly, yes. They realized that you couldn't separate the structure of language from the mind that produces it. And at the same time, the medical world was jumping in. You had Paul Broca and Carl Wernicke.
Discovering that specific damage to the brain caused specific language problems, aphasias.
Exactly. Which proved language had a physical address. It wasn't just floating in the ether. It was in the left hemisphere of the brain.
So you had philosophy, psychology, biology, all converging. It should have been the start of a beautiful friendship.
It should have been. But, like most relationships in history, it got complicated. We enter the dark ages of psycholinguistics. The source describes a pretty messy divorce.
So what happened?
Well, the linguists decided they wanted to be independent. They wanted to describe language as a pure system, like a crystal, without worrying about the messy psychology of the person speaking it. They wanted to study the code, not the computer.
And the psychologists.
They got distracted by their own civil wars. But in America, something huge took over that essentially wiped the mind off the map: behaviorism.
The era of rats and levers.
And B.F. Skinner. The behaviorists decided that if you couldn't see it, you shouldn't study it, since you can't see a mind or a thought. They just decided those things didn't scientifically exist.
So how do you explain language if you ignore the mind? That seems impossible.
You call it verbal behavior. Skinner basically argued that language is just a set of habits learned through reward and punishment. You say cookie, you get a cookie, you learn the habit.
And thought.
Thought was dismissed as just subvocal speech, tiny movements of your vocal cords that didn't make sound.
So no magic, no ideas, just muscle twitches and habits.
Right. It stripped the psycho right out of psycholinguistics.
Yeah.
But there was one very famous idea from this era that still pops up in pop culture: the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Oh, I know this one.
Yeah.
This is the movie Arrival. The idea that the language you speak determines how you think.
That's the one. And there's a famous story about Benjamin Lee Whorf that the sources mention. Whorf wasn't actually a professor. He was a fire prevention engineer by trade.
Wait, really? He wasn't an academic linguist?
He was a self-taught linguist, and in his job, he noticed something dangerous at chemical plants. Workers would be incredibly careful around gasoline drums labeled full, but around drums labeled empty, they'd become casual. They'd light cigarettes, toss matches.
Oh, no. Even though empty drums are usually full of explosive vapor.
Exactly. The word empty suggested safe or void to their minds. Whorf argued that the linguistic label overrode the physical reality. The word controlled the behavior.
That is such a compelling story. It makes you wonder how much our words are editing our reality right now.
It is compelling. Students love it. But I have to be the buzzkill here. The source authors admit that while it's a great anecdote, the strict version of this hypothesis, that language prisons our thoughts, is pretty controversial and hard to prove scientifically.
It's a bit too strong.
Yeah. They even say it can be embarrassing to present the stronger arguments for it today.
So language influences us, sure, but it doesn't totally control our perception.
Correct. We aren't trapped by our grammar.
Now, before we get to the modern reunion, there were some hidden gems in the early 20th century, right? Even while behaviorism was taking over, some people were doing cool stuff.
Absolutely. We have to talk about Freud.
Freud, the dream guy. I did not expect him in a linguistics deep dive.
Well, put aside the mother issues for a second. In 1901, Freud wrote about slips of the tongue, Freudian slips. Now, usually, pop culture focuses on the why you said sex instead of six because of your subconscious desires.
Boy.
But what's interesting for psycholinguistics is that Freud noted these errors weren't random. They followed linguistic rules.
So even when we mess up grammatically.
Precisely. You swap nouns for nouns, verbs for verbs. It showed there was a system at work below the surface, organizing our speech, even when we weren't paying attention. It wasn't just random habits.
And there was another breakthrough around this time that I think is fascinating. It's about how we read.
Yes. The eye movement research.
I love this because it feels so counterintuitive. I feel like when I read, my eyes are just gliding smoothly across the page like a flatbed scanner.
And that is a complete illusion.
Right. The source mentions Émile Javal, who discovered that our eyes actually move in jerks.
They're called saccades. And in between the jerks, the eye stops. That's a fixation. And here is the kicker. You only actually take in information when your eye is stopped.
So while my eye is moving during the saccade, I'm technically blind.
Effectively, yes. Your brain suppresses the input so the world doesn't look like a blur. Then it stitches the snapshots together so it feels smooth. This was discovered in the early 1900s by researchers like Huey and Dodge, but it was largely ignored by the behaviorists. Today, though, it's the foundation of reading science.
Okay, let's jump to the 1950s, the reunion. The band gets back together.
The cognitive revolution. There were seminars held by Osgood and Seebeck explicitly to reunite psychology and linguistics. They wanted to bridge the gap.
But then, a new player enters the game. Someone who completely flips the table. Noam Chomsky.
You cannot overstate the impact of Chomsky. He came in and essentially dismantled behaviorism. He wrote a scathing review of Skinner's book, arguing that you can't explain language just by habits.
Because language is creative?
It's creative. We can say sentences that have never been said before in the history of the universe.
The purple elephant danced the cha-cha on Mars.
Exactly. You didn't learn that by repeating it for a treat. You generated it using an internal set of rules, a grammar.
So Chomsky brings the mind back into the equation.
Yeah.
But then there's this specific theory, the derivational theory of complexity. That sounds like a mouthful.
It is, and it's a great example of a beautiful theory meeting an ugly fact. The idea, proposed by Miller and Chomsky, was simple. If Chomsky's grammar rules are real in our heads, then a sentence with more transformation should be harder to process.
So a complex passive sentence like, the ball was thrown by the boy,
Right.
should take longer to understand than the boy threw the ball.
Right.
Because my brain has to do more mental gymnastics to unpack it.
That was the idea. They thought they could map linguistic theory directly onto psychological processing time.
Yeah.
It didn't work. The data just didn't line up. It turned out that linguistic complexity and psychological difficulty are not the same thing. You can have a complex sentence that's easy to understand because of context, and a simple one that's confusing.
That must have been a letdown.
It was a huge reality check. It showed that having a theory of grammar, the abstract rules, is different from having a theory of processing how the brain actually does it.
This era also saw the rise of AI, right? The good old-fashioned AI.
Yes, Joe FAI. This gave us programs like Eliza in the 60s. Eliza was a chatbot that mimicked a therapist. You'd say, "I'm sad," and it would say, "Tell me more about why you were sad."
And people fell for it. They thought it really understood them.
Which caused a huge backlash when they realized it was just a simple script, it was a parlor trick, it didn't know anything, it was just manipulating symbols.
Which brings us to the future directions, part of our source material. We've looked at the history, the split, the reunion, the AI attempts. But where are we going now? The authors highlight two big areas. The first one is dialogue.
Which sounds obvious, right?
It does. I mean, we're doing it right now. It seems like the most basic form of language.
It is. But historically, psycholinguistics has almost entirely studied monologue, reading a sentence on a screen, listening to a speech.
Why? If dialogue is how most of us use language.
Because dialogue is messy. It's chaotic. People interrupt, they finish each other's sentences, they grunt, they nod. It's a nightmare to control in a lab.
It's not a clean experiment.
Not at all. If you're a scientist, you want a clean petri dish, and dialogue is a dirty petri dish.
But the source says this is changing.
It is. Researchers like Pickering and Garrod are shifting the focus to what they call alignment. The idea is that in a conversation, we aren't just two separate computers sending data back and forth. We become a coupled system. We align our mental models. If I call a specific object a gizmo, you'll probably start calling it a gizmo too. We sync up our syntax, our vocabulary, even our pronunciation. Successful communication isn't just decoding, it's alignment.
It's like a Vulcan mind meld on a budget. We're trying to get our operating systems to match.
Essentially. And this connects to the second future direction, which I think's the biggest aha moment of the entire chapter, embodied cognition.
This is the part that blew my mind. The authors complain that lab sentences are usually so boring, like the cat sat on the mat. But real reading is visceral. When I read a thriller, I feel the cold wind. I smell the stale beer.
Exactly. And the question is that feeling just a byproduct, or is it how we understand? Embodied cognition argues that meaning is grounded in our physical bodies.
There was an experiment mentioned, Glenberg and Keshtak, that perfectly illustrates this.
This is a classic. They had participants verify sentences on a computer. Some sentences implied movement away from the body, like you handed Courtney the notebook. Others implied movement toward the body, like Courtney handed you the notebook.
Okay. And to answer yes, I understand, the participants had to push a button.
But here's the trick. Sometimes the yes button was close to them, requiring a pulling motion, and sometimes it was far away, requiring a pushing motion.
And what happened?
People were significantly faster when the physical motion matched the sentence. If the sentence was, "You handed Courtney the notebook," a push action, and the button required a push, they were fast.
But if they had to pull the button for that sentence?
Their brain jammed up. It was slower. This implies that when you read handed the notebook, your brain is literally prepping your muscles to push.
That is wild. You can't separate the meaning from the motor system.
You really can't. And the neuroscience backs this up too. When you read the word kick, the part of your motor cortex that controls your leg lights up. When you read pick, the finger area lights up.
And lick.
The tongue area lights up.
So reading isn't just data processing. It's a full-body workout simulation.
Yeah, precisely. We understand language by running a simulation of the world in our own bodies. We use our own physical experiences to ground the abstract symbols of language.
So let's just unpack what this all means. We started with Plato and innate ideas. We went through the dark ages of behaviorism where the mind didn't matter. We saw Chomsky bring the mind back with abstract rules. And now we're landing on this idea that language is physical, interactive, and aligned.
It's a beautiful arc. We've gone from viewing language as a static object on a page to a dynamic activity that is deeply rooted in our biology and our social connections.
It really changes how I think about reading. I'm not just a computer processing code. My body is physically resonating with the words.
And that resonance is what makes communication possible. It's not just about the dictionary definition, it's about the shared physical experience.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy question to chew on. And I want to throw this out to you listening right now.
If our understanding of language is fundamentally rooted in our bodies, in having legs to kick and hands to push, what does that mean for artificial intelligence?
All right. We have these large language models now that can write poetry and code, but they don't have bodies. They've never felt a cold wind or pushed a notebook.
So can they ever truly understand language? Or will they always just be a very sophisticated version of that empty gas drum labels without the physical reality?
Can you have a mind without a body? That's the question.
Yeah.
Something to think about next time you're chatting with a bot. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.